From the good to the bad, there have been many monsters in the Godzilla franchise. Starting with the worst monster, the giant condor easily takes that spot, being easily defeated by Godzilla and having an overall bad design. The monster from All Monsters Attack, or most widely known as Godzilla's Revenge, is Gabara, one of the worst monsters in the franchise, with its design looking humanoid and being low quality. From the less than stellar anime, Mechagodzilla City arrives at being one of the worst monsters, if it can even qualify as one. This version of Mechagodzilla wastes all potential of being in an animated film, being more limited than Suitmation itself. Continuing the tradition of wasted potential, Anime Ghidorah has basically no attacks, with it basically looking like thorns on a rosebush. Its only good qualities is being well animated, and reflecting Godzilla's atomic breath in a satisfying way. Next is one of the worst puppets in the Showa era, in 1964 with Mothra Larva's design. There is simply no comparison between this version of Mothra and its predecessor from 1956. Now, from Final Wars, Kumonga arrives on this list. Its design, despite being practical, appears to be an animated model, which isn't a good thing. The texture being smooth and plasticky makes it awkwardly stand out compared to the scenery. And again from the 2004 Godzilla film is Ebirah. While the design is decently done, the monster itself is pretty useless, being defeated by small guns. Overall, not leaving much for this version of the sea monster. Starring in the beloved GMK, Mothra takes a low spot on this list, with its design easily being the worst look for the monster, having the model look rubbery and unconvincing. Zilla from Godzilla Final Wars is done worse than the monster it was based on, in almost every single way, with its animation looking like in-game PS2 quality, and overall not having much to do for the monster, except to be destroyed by Godzilla in glorious fashion. And from the same film, Manila has the same problem as Kumonga, looking too smooth and not matching its surroundings. A film that has some of the best and worst designs produced Manila, which is one of the worst quality designs of the franchise, while at the same time they are able to tell a good story through these monsters, which is the reason for it being this high. One of the worst Ghidorahs is from the film GMK. From its design to its role in this film, GMK Ghidorah is one of the worst Godzilla monsters, having short heads that move very poorly, as well as the design itself being short and awkward. Throughout their fight, Ghidorah gets beat up and presents zero threat, while its power-up form only serves for an excuse for Ghidorah to get beat up more. Another one of the worst designs from iconic monster is Final Wars Anguirus. They give him an incredibly short face, completely ruining his iconic look. Kamacuras in Godzilla Final Wars is a decent monster, with a detailed design, but he is incredibly useless, being impaled by an electrical transmission tower. And from one of the most beloved Godzilla films, Rodan's design is completely awful. There's literally no positive thing I can say about the design, with its puppet looking even worse. Comparing this thing to the original 1957 Rodan design makes the design from Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster look like a complete joke. Hedorah's design in Final Wars isn't great, with it looking rubbery and low quality. The monster itself also has little to do in the film. In Destroy All Monsters, Manda makes an appearance, with its design looking like a mix of a snake and a Chinese dragon, which looks quite good. The monster itself does very little if anything at all, but still leaves a lasting impression. Rodan's design from Final Wars is one of the worst designs for the monster, having its proportions look too human, and overall not being much better than the 1964 version. Now with King Caesar, the short face given to most designs in Final Wars don't look too bad for this monster. Although the design lacks the iconic look of the original, his combat is done decently enough. From the original King Kong vs. Godzilla is the worst King Kong design ever created, having weirdly extended arms and a mashed up face, looking more like a parody of King Kong than the actual thing. His combat also mostly consisting of throwing rocks and poorly done wrestling. Now, Mothra from the highly praised Mothra vs. Godzilla is one of the worst Mothras ever created, having a raggedy look and poorly done fights, repeating footage throughout the fight and being destroyed by one blast of atomic breath. Ebirah is one of the highest quality designs in the Showa era, looking incredibly realistic with the texture and detail of its skin being more realistic than certain monsters 30 years later. Next is Little Godzilla. Trying to repeat the success of Godzilla vs. Mothra by appealing to its female audience, they made the monster's design more friendly. By choosing to do so, it makes Little Godzilla stand out from the scenery, and not in a good way. Next is Kaiser Ghidorah. His design looks strange, having 4 legs and a weirdly shaped face. Its best qualities is laser, which can move monsters, but overall not being really anything amazing. From the Heisei era, Mothra larva's form isn't bad or great. Overall, it looks decent, but its movement isn't the best. Starring in the newest Godzilla film, Scar King makes it pretty high on this list, considering his design is poorly animated, lacking proper lighting and details, making his skin look plasticky. He is also an incredibly weak monster. Mothra's final form in Godzilla vs. Mothra is one of the weaker designs in the film. Although certain moths do have this look, it doesn't match the scenery. The films make up for this by giving Mothra lasers and glitter, creating some beautiful scenes. Manda from Final Wars is very well done, having him look more detailed and realistic. Next is Titanosaurus from Terror of Mechagodzilla. It's a mix of both good and bad. The most going for it is its iconic design and roar, while the quality of the suit and combat are lacking. The mutated version of Rodan makes it here with his Fire Rodan form, with his color being oversaturated and his model not being very well detailed. Next is Megalon from the Showa era. He is a very creative monster, having drills for his hand and wings that help him fly. He can also shoot firebombs and stock footage lasers, but the film he is in makes it hard to take him seriously. Jet Jaguar, also from Godzilla vs. Megalon, is a decent mecha, although his design is poorly made, with it looking like the suit's made out of pool noodles. His combat is decently done, creating some very iconic scenes. Batro's final form is a cool design, with its main drawback being the lack of mobility in its legs and overall design. Origa, the first Millennium monster, is pretty cool. Although the design is pretty generic, he was put to good use in the film, with him almost turning into a clone of Godzilla before his ultimate destruction. Now the Warbat from Godzilla vs. Kong is a very good monster, having it be a food source for Kong, and being very well animated. Also from Godzilla vs. Kong is Doug, and even though he only has one small part in the film, he has kept a lasting impression on fans. The original form of King Caesar is very creative, somehow making a monster with human proportions not look human. He has a few creative abilities, and his combat was very well done. From Godzilla vs. Biollante is Biollante's final form, easily the most wasted potential for any Godzilla monster, with Biollante having a highly detailed design, but lacking any physical or other creative combat. Having the vines do all the work so the suit doesn't have to do anything makes for one of the worst fights, and creating one of the most anticlimactic endings. The Final Wars version of Gigan is probably one of the weakest monsters ever shown, having his head blown clean off by Godzilla's atomic breath, but his design easily makes up for that. From the 2014 movie, the male Muto is a decent monster, lacking the creativity and design of the other Godzilla monsters, but being grounded in enough to create some menacing scenes. Mothra larva's form in Tokyo SOS is an improvement from the previous versions, looking more like the original 1956 version, but still not having much of anything special. Godzilla the King of the Monsters' Mothra design is very creative. While Mothra looks more like a praying mantis than a moth, it is excellently done. Destroy's flying form is easily the worst form of the monster. The design being very well detailed and extremely creative is made better with a roar that can only be described as a low electronic growl. It is very unique and is easily one of the best flying monsters of the Heisei era. In one of the most forgettable Godzilla films, Mothra's design is one of the most detailed, with its wings being realistic and overall looking extremely good. But this version of Mothra lacks any creative attacks, making it completely forgettable. Monster X from Final Wars is easily one of the best monsters in the film, having creative fights and weapons, with the main problem with the monster being its humanoid look, with it being more obvious than any previous monster, with Gabara being the only exception. But the highly detailed design and great fights make up for that to a certain extent. Flying in from the Showa era is the original Ghidorah, the best design of the Showa era, having individual scales and great movement in its flying form. The main problem with this Ghidorah is the lack of really any combat at all. This Ghidorah is limited to shooting lasers that only stun the monsters, and not being able to do anything at all in terms of physical combat, making for some of the worst fights of the Showa era, where the suit actors have to act like they are fighting to cover up the fact that they can't actually hit the Ghidorah suit. Next in line is the Kamacuras, being very well detailed and having some pretty good fights. The main problem is the wires being visible, as well as certain movements looking unnatural, but overall being one of the best designs in the film. The Skullcrawler from Kong Skull Island and Godzilla vs. Kong is very intimidating. The creative design and well choreographed fights of this monster make for some of the most iconic scenes in the Monsterverse. Baragon from GMK is easily the best design of that film, not looking robotic or poorly made like certain other designs. Although this Baragon falls into the same road Heisei Gamera did, with them having the eyes pushed forward to the front of their head, it doesn't look bad here, with Baragon looking intimidating or helpless depending on the scene. One of the best Showa monsters is Gorosaurus from Destroy All Monsters, with him actually having physical combat. Unlike Godzilla who doesn't want to hurt the Ghidorah suit, Gorosaurus completely destroys Ghidorah, and also has a very well made suit at the same time. Now, Biolante's Roar's form is one of the best designs in the film, but the monster itself is about as effective as Biolante's final form. MonsterVerse Mechagodzilla is a creative look on the monster, having the most agile mecha in the franchise. Overall, it has nothing special, but is a decent addition to the MonsterVerse. Next is Kumonga, from Son of Godzilla, one of the most intimidating monsters, with its poison stinger adding a lot of tension to the film. The design itself is incredibly done, with there being a lot of detail in the suit. Although the wire work isn't great, what they have the monster do in this film easily makes up for that. Megaguirus is a creative monster, with abilities such as super speed and drainage abilities. Despite Megaguirus' advantages, its monotone colors and design makes for a forgettable monster. Godzilla Jr. from one of the best Godzilla films has a very good design, looking more like Godzilla with smaller dorsal plates. The quality of the design is up and down, sometimes looking good, but other times having the skin look too loose. Next is Mecha King Ghidorah, a creative version of the monster that is very well made, having multicolored lasers originally intended for the main King Ghidorah design, as well as mechanical arms, making this the best unique version of Ghidorah. Based on the Heisei version, King of the Monsters Rodan is very good. His movement and abilities are very grounded, making him feel like a natural disaster. The female Muto, although the design is generic like the male Muto, this monster is made incredibly intimidating throughout the film, and its ability to send out an EMP, although not unique to the franchise, is a very interesting concept to focus on. Hedorah from the Showa era is easily one of the strangest Godzilla monsters, having multiple powers and being one of the only monsters in the Showa era to be taller than Godzilla. Hedorah is able to melt Godzilla's skin through physical touch or just flying over him. The design is also incredibly well made. Kiryu from the Millennium Godzilla films is a decent Mechagodzilla. He is much faster than previous mechas, but he is beat up by Godzilla throughout the films. And although his design is highly detailed, it looks a bit rubbery at times. Anguirus' Showa version is one of the most iconic monsters. His spiky shell and unique look add a lot to this design, as well as him being a very formidable monster in the Showa era. From Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, the Godzillasaurus has one of the most detailed monster designs, creating a more dinosaur look for the monster, while not trying to stray too far from the feeling of Godzilla. Kong from the MonsterVerse is a very good staple of the series. Being very well animated in Godzilla vs. Kong, he adds a lot of life to the series that most other monsters couldn't offer. His vulnerability makes the fights more engaging, but his intelligence makes for a more strategic approach. Baby Godzilla from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 is the best animatronic suit of the Godzilla franchise, being able to have precise movements in its face, down to things like his nose and cheek muscles. Baby Godzilla adds an emotional connection to the monsters, with his overall design and mannerisms making him feel realistic. Rodan's normal form from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 is the best design for the monster, having certain scenes look real at times, with the brown color perfectly matching the scenery. This form of Rodan makes use of his abilities, outmatching Godzilla with his speed and agility. Gigan's original version in 1972 is the best version of the character. Although the suit looks a little bit too humanoid, overall it is very good. Mechagodzilla from the original Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla film is easily the most iconic. Having missile hands and multicolored lasers, most of his attacks are able to badly hurt Godzilla. His design, although looking a little bit rubbery, is one of the best later Showa designs. From the MonsterVerse, Ghidorah is one of the best monsters in the series. With Ghidorah having the standard electricity and abilities such as healing factor, this version of the monster takes the original version of Ghidorah and modernizes it. But the best version of Ghidorah is Heisei King Ghidorah, whose design was supervised by the same guy who worked on the Showa version of the monster. Mixing in the look from Western dragons, this creates an aggressive look for the heads. Space Godzilla, the clone of Godzilla, has the most powers out of any Godzilla monsters, and all of them being extremely creative. His design is menacing, with his face not being as long as Godzilla's, but still being incredibly intimidating. Destroyer's crab form is one of the only monsters to add horror elements to the Godzilla franchise, with the design itself being based on American films, such as Alien. His fight against the army is very well done, as well as his attack against Godzilla Jr. and Burning Godzilla. Mogira from Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla is a much more detailed suit than its predecessor, and its wide variety of weapons are incredibly well done, having a mix of both physical attacks and lasers, with him also being able to roll around and shoot giant missiles. Easily the best Mechagodzilla is Mechagodzilla 2. Although he looks strange at certain angles, he looks amazing in most scenes, with the plastic suit looking like real metal at times, as well as the suit actor perfectly matching the robotic look for Mechagodzilla. This makes Mechagodzilla feel more grounded compared to the other versions of the mecha. The best monster in the Godzilla franchise is Destroyer. Destroyer has the most physical attacks of any Heisei monster, as well as his lasers being sparingly used and creatively used in the form of a laser horn. Unlike Mothra 1964, who unconvincingly drags a miniature Godzilla, Destroyer's full suit was used to drag Godzilla across the city, all the way into the ocean. The creativity in the fights, as well as his design being the most intimidating, easily makes Destroyer the best Godzilla monster. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.